Greetings everyone, I'm Detective STARBORN, and I'm glad to see you on my YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you, and enjoy watching. A student left work and disappeared right in the middle of a phone conversation under very strange circumstances. Police officers began their search for her, reviewing hundreds of hours of surveillance footage and trying to find any leads. Soon, they managed to discover something truly terrifying in these frames, but the girl's fate remained unknown for several months. In the end, the investigators still got to the truth, and the outcome of this case caused mass indignation and outrage. Drew Shaw Din was born on September 26, 1981, in the small town of Pequot Lakes, Minnesota. From early childhood, Drew was very active and goal-oriented. She loved drawing and creating various crafts, and also played basketball, volleyball, and golf. In addition, she participated in various charitable events and strived to help everyone who needed it. Thanks to all this, she had a lot of friends, and in high school she won the title of prom queen. After finishing school, Drew enrolled at the University of North Dakota, majoring in fine arts. Despite it being a 3-hour drive from her hometown, the girl tried to visit her parents as often as possible. At the same time, she managed to study with excellent grades, work in 2 places, and take an active part in university life, including continuing to engage in charity work. Drew also signed up for a special university program that allowed her to travel regularly, and the girl was looking forward to the opportunity to go to Australia. While studying at the university, Drew began dating a guy named Chris, and the couple made plans for a future together. On November 22, 2003, when she was 22, Drew, as usual, went to her day shift at the clothing store where she worked part-time on weekends. After that, the girl was supposed to go to the bar where she worked as a waitress for the evening shift. After finishing her first job, Drew went to the store next door, bought Yu a handbag, and headed for the parking lot. On the way, she called her boyfriend, and the couple talked for about 4 minutes. Then something strange happened. In the middle of the conversation, Drew suddenly fell silent, then said, "Oh God, okay," and hung up. At first, Chris didn't think much of it. The guy thought that the girl's connection could have been cut off when she entered the parking lot, or her phone ran out of battery. 3 hours later, he received a call from Drew, but when Chris picked up the phone, there was silence. He only heard some noise like wind, as well as something like the sound of buttons being pressed on the phone. He said the girl's name several times, but there was no response. The guy tried to call her back, but Drew never answered. This time he began to worry and decided to call her roommate. She said that she hadn't talked to her all day, but added that the girl was probably just busy at work and he shouldn't worry. However, soon after this conversation, the roommate received a call from Drew's boss at the bar where she was supposed to work the evening shift. To her surprise, he said that Drew hadn't shown up for work and hadn't even notified anyone about it. This was very uncharacteristic of her, because Drew always took her responsibilities very seriously. Moreover, the roommate remembered the conversation with her boyfriend and began to worry that something bad might have happened to her friend. The girl began calling local hospitals, but no one resembling Drew had been admitted to any of them. By then, it was already late evening, and the friend decided to go to the police. The girl told them that Drew had missed her work shift and hadn't returned home. She also shared information about the strange calls between her and her boyfriend. However, the police were in no hurry to start searching. They felt that all of the above wasn't compelling enough evidence to believe that something bad could have happened to the girl. Besides, she was 22 years old, and the police advised waiting some more time before raising the alarm. Despite this, the friend didn't follow their advice and turned to the university police where Drew was studying. There, like in many educational institutions in the USA, there was a separate police station, and the officers immediately began working on the case. They went to the shopping center where the girl worked, since that was the last place she had contacted anyone she knew. Entering the parking lot, the police saw her car. It was still parked in her usual spot, even though Drew's shift had ended many hours ago. Another suspicious point was that the car doors were not locked. Inside the car, there were no signs of struggle or other evidence that something could have happened to Drew. However, soon, the police saw a case from a small pocket knife on the floor next to the car, and this find caused them serious concern. They contacted the city police, and they joined the investigation. The officers requested footage from the parking lot cameras, but here they encountered a problem. The place where Drew's car was parked did not fall within the view of any of the cameras. As a result, the police began viewing recordings from all the cameras in the shopping center, hoping to recreate the chronology of events before her disappearance. Given the huge area of the building, they had to watch hundreds of hours of footage, which took a considerable amount of time. At the same time, the news of Drew's disappearance spread through her university, and the administration quickly organized a search operation. They involved hundreds of students, divided them into groups, and sent them to inspect the streets, wooded areas, the banks of the local river, and other remote places. The administration also asked all students to share any information that could shed light on the girl's disappearance. Meanwhile, police received data on Drew's phone activity, which confirmed her boyfriend's story. But when they studied the information about her phone's location, they were in for a rather strange discovery. According to cell tower data, the last time Drew called her boyfriend was from a neighboring town, about 30 minutes drive from the shopping center. Comparing the time, investigators concluded that during this call, Chris heard some noise like wind and the sounds of buttons being pressed. Given that her car remained in the parking lot, the girl clearly couldn't have covered this distance on her own, and the police began to think that she might have been kidnapped. Despite this, in the next few days, they still couldn't find a single lead. Officers continued to view all the cameras from the shopping center, and search groups combed the city in search of any clues. This went on for 2 days until the police finally received their first serious lead. Officers from a small town called Crookston, which was located near the signal location of Drew's phone, found a black shoe on the riverbank. The police showed it to the girl's roommate, and she confirmed that Drew had the exact same shoes. This find further heightened the investigators' suspicions. If the girl had indeed been kidnapped, the available evidence indicated that she had been taken many tens of kilometers away from the city. They contacted colleagues from cities further in that direction and briefed them on the case, asking them to help with the search. Meanwhile, the police finally found footage from the cameras in the shopping center where Drew was present. They saw that after the end of her shift, the girl went to several stores. Apparently, she was buying Christmas gifts for her loved ones. These frames allowed them to find out what clothes Drew was wearing at the time of her disappearance, as well as confirm that she was wearing the same black shoes as those found near the river in another city. Having collected all the available video recordings where Drew was present, the investigators began to look for any suspicious people who could have been following the girl, or who simply appeared with her in the same frames more often than others. Soon they noticed one particular person. A middle-aged man with a cane, dressed all in black, attracted their attention with rather strange behavior. Based on the camera recordings, he repeatedly entered the grocery supermarket connected to the shopping center. At the same time, he never bought anything. Instead, it seemed to the police that the man was not even looking at the shelves with goods, but was watching other visitors, especially women. Soon, investigators found this person on other recordings outside the store. He was sitting on a bench and looking at passersby, but then something really suspicious happened. When a young girl who looked somewhat like Drew passed by him, he got up from the bench and followed her. In the next few hours, the police found several more similar cases on the recordings where the same man was walking behind other girls. The camera footage alone was not enough to establish the identity of this person, so the detectives decided to search the database of all men who lived in that city and had convictions for serious offenses. Having compiled a list of 60 names, they narrowed it down to 4, eliminating all unsuitable candidates. Among the remaining people, the police chose the one who most resembled the man from the shopping center. It was 50-year-old Alfonso Rodriguez. He had an impressive criminal history, as well as a rather difficult past. From childhood, Rodriguez had serious health problems, which caused him problems at school and in communicating with the opposite sex. For example, one of his legs was shorter than the other, so he was forced to use a cane for walking. As a result, Alfonso began taking banned substances, and at the age of 21, he was first caught by the police for attempting to assault an unfamiliar woman who offered to give him a ride home. When the man got into the car, he pulled out a knife and tried to attack her, but the victim managed to fight back. Later, he assaulted 2 other women a month apart. The court sentenced him to compulsory therapy, which lasted for 5 years, after which the man was released. In the same year, he was arrested again on suspicion of assault, but this time the prosecution could not find sufficient evidence to convict him. Soon after, Alfonso tried to kidnap another woman and inflicted stab wounds on her, for which he was arrested again. This time, the man was sentenced to 23 years in prison, and he was released on May 1st, 2003, 7 months before Drew's disappearance. It is noteworthy that Alfonso was released under the supervision of his relatives, although they themselves openly expressed doubts that he was ready to return to society. After his release, he lived with his mother in the city of Crookston, the same place where the police found Drew's shoe. Given all of the above, the detectives had almost no doubt that Alfonso had something to do with her disappearance. On the 4th day of the investigation, they brought the man in for questioning, and he admitted that he had indeed been in that shopping center. However, Alfonso insisted that he had nothing to do with the abduction and went there to watch a movie in the cinema located inside this building. The man gave them a specific movie, and the investigators went to check this information. To their surprise, they quickly established that such a movie was not shown not only in this cinema, but also in any others in this city. Realizing that Alfonso had lied to them, the police asked to inspect his car, and the man allowed them to do so without a warrant. Inside, they found a receipt from the store, according to which Alfonso had bought a pocket knife. Having studied this model, the detectives concluded that the knife case found near the car belonged to the same model. But that wasn't all. The knife itself was also in the car. It was lying in a bottle filled with cleaning agent. When Alfonso's car was handed over to forensic experts, they found traces of wiped blood there, and the experts were able to extract a DNA sample from it. Comparing it with the DNA from Drew's toothbrush, they got a complete match. In addition to all this, a woman's shoe and another knife, which was not filled with cleaning agent, were found in the car. After conducting an analysis, experts found traces of blood on it, which also matched Drew's DNA. On December 10th, when all this evidence was gathered together, Alfonso was arrested on charges of kidnapping and possible murder. But despite the fact that his guilt seemed almost obvious to the detectives, they still didn't know what had happened to the missing girl. Alfonso himself refused to give a confession, so the police concentrated all their efforts on the search. They turned to the public for help, attracted even more volunteers, and focused on Crookston and its surroundings. Despite all their efforts, the search yielded no results for long months. The situation was complicated by the fact that quite heavy snowfalls continued throughout the winter, and the search teams simply could not reach hard-to-access places. In early March of the following year, 3 months after the girl's disappearance, preparations began for the trial of Alfonso, and he pleaded not guilty before the judge. No one believed that Drew was still alive, but with the available set of evidence, the prosecution could still get a conviction. Meanwhile, the police continued their search. With the beginning of spring, the snow began to melt, which made it easier for them to reach hard-to-access areas like forests and fields. This continued until April 17th, until the investigators finally received sad but expected news. Drew's body was found several kilometers west of Crookston, in the water of the local river. In winter, this place was covered with ice and snow, so the search teams had virtually no chance to find her earlier. But as soon as the snow finally melted, it was noticed quickly enough. Medical experts found abrasions, traces of stab wounds, and signs of assault on her body. As for the cause of death, they could not come to an exact conclusion. In addition to stab wounds, experts also found traces of strangulation. But there was a third option, according to which the victim died from the cold after the criminal left her in this place. The experts also established that she died approximately 3 hours after the abduction. Now that the police had found the victim's body, the prosecution had only one task left: to achieve a just punishment for the killer. Due to the fact that the place of abduction was in North Dakota and the murder itself took place in neighboring Minnesota, the charges in this case were of a federal nature. This meant that Alfonso could be sentenced to death, even though this type of punishment was prohibited in both states. Despite this, the governor of Minnesota spoke out in support of such a sentence, although there were quite a large number of people in this state who were against the death penalty. As for North Dakota, this case became the first in 100 years in which a resident of the state faced the death penalty. The trial began in the summer of 2006, and Alfonso continued to insist on his innocence. However, with such evidence, he simply had no chance of avoiding punishment, and on February 8, 2007, he was sentenced to death. As in all other cases with this sentence, the wait for execution dragged on for many years, which Alfonso spent in prison. Meanwhile, Drew's relatives took part in the development of a law that implied the creation of a national registry of criminals convicted of violent crimes. In the summer of 2007, this law, named in memory of Drew, was signed by the president and came into force. It implied the creation of a website where one could find out the address and other information about all criminals convicted under articles related to violence. The girl's parents also repeatedly said that the authorities should not have initially released Alfonso. Later, his attending physician, who was engaged in the man's compulsory rehabilitation, told reporters that he was against Alfonso's release and recommended transferring him from the clinic to prison. But despite this, the criminal was still released back into society. Unfortunately, for Drew's relatives, the sentencing did not become the endpoint in this case. In 2011, Alfonso's lawyers tried to challenge the court's decision, insisting that their client had developmental problems. Their attempts led nowhere, but 10 years later, in 2021, a new appeal was more successful. The judge agreed that Rodriguez did indeed have developmental problems, and during the first trial, the lawyers were not given the opportunity to present sufficient evidence of this fact. The judge also noted his difficult childhood and serious health problems. In addition, the criminal's lawyers insisted that the medical expert who testified at the trial exaggerated the injuries, and in fact, everything was not so bad. As a result, the judge overturned the death sentence and appointed a new trial, the results of which in March 2023 Alfonso received a life sentence. With all this, back in 2013, he confessed to his cellmates when he gave an interview from death row. But now he will have to spend the rest of his life behind bars, not worrying that one day he might be executed. In memory of Drew, her university established a separate scholarship, which is still in effect today. In addition, the girl's relatives opened a memorial garden in her hometown, and in the near future, the same kind of place is planned to be created on the territory of her university campus. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you and enjoy watching. This chilling story will leave no one indifferent. A 14-year-old girl left her home for a walk and vanished without a trace. She was searched for over a month, and this investigation became the largest in the past 9 years. Thanks to hundreds of police officers and surveillance camera footage, this mystery was eventually solved, but the truth turned out to be far more tangled and shocking. In this video, we will tell you what happened to Alice Gross. Alice Gross was born on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2000 in London. She grew up in a complete loving family, and she also had an older sister. From an early age, the girl demonstrated a penchant for creativity. She loved drawing, played the piano and violin. Later, Alice began writing her own magnificent songs and performing them to her own music. We will show one such composition performed by Alice at the end of this video. In addition, the girl was passionate about fashion design and at the age of 11 even created a dress for herself, which she planned to wear to her school prom. When the girl was 13 years old, doctors diagnosed her with anorexia, as well as depression. Despite all this, Alice continued to engage in creativity, and in the future, she had every chance to achieve colossal success. On August 28, 2014, Alice told her mom that she was going for a walk. She was on her school holidays and had plenty of free time, so the girl loved to walk along a small water canal and river near her home. They lived as a family in a London suburb called Hanwell, and her usual route was 4.5 kilometers. The girl left around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, promising her parents to return around 6 in the evening. Later, she texted her father that she would be home soon. However, Alice did not return at the appointed time, and when it was already 7 in the evening, her parents began to worry. They tried to call her, but the girl's phone was turned off. The fact that Alice suffered from anorexia and depression only added to the anxiety. The parents feared that something could have happened to her. Due to her physical condition, she experienced constant weakness and could faint. The parents called several of her friends, hoping that Alice might be with them, but no one had seen the girl that day, and her mother and father decided to contact the police. They immediately started the search and first examined the route that Alice usually walked. Her relatives and family friends also took part in the search. Alas, they failed to find any traces of the girl, but the detectives managed to locate several witnesses. Thanks to their testimonies about where Alice passed, the police were able to more accurately determine her route, which in turn allowed them to narrow the search area and select several street cameras that could have captured her. After examining the footage, the detectives indeed found Alice. Almost immediately after leaving home, she was caught on the first camera, heading along the Grand Union Canal. Sometime later, she was spotted in the Brentford area, which was further down the canal. The last time the camera captured her was on her way back, near the Trumpers Way Bridge. The police also relayed information about the teenager's disappearance to the media, which spread the news about this case throughout London within the first hours after the disappearance. As a result, the detectives received several calls from witnesses who had seen Alice. Unfortunately, all this did not bring the police closer to finding the girl. Based on the camera footage and witness accounts, she disappeared on her way home after covering most of her usual route. But what happened to her remained a mystery. 3 days passed, and the police continued to study the footage from cameras in nearby areas, as well as search local parks and other secluded places. At the same time, patrol officers went door to door along Alice's route, asking questions to local residents. On September 1st, the girl's relatives recorded a video appeal in which they begged her to come home. They also asked anyone with any information about her whereabouts to contact the police. At that point, the investigators were considering several theories. The first and most alarming was the abduction version. Despite the fact that most of Alice's route passed along city streets, there were many remote sections hidden from prying eyes where the girl could have been attacked. Moreover, the London police often deal with situations where people are kidnapped right in the city center, let alone in the suburbs. The second theory was that she had run away from home. Alice's parents feared that depression could have pushed her to such a decision. They also did not rule out that the girl, due to her illnesses, could have taken her own life. But for the police, these versions seemed unlikely. At her 14 years old, Alice was hardly able to run away and hide, especially without outside help. And if she had taken her own life, she would most likely have been found already. Every day, this case attracted more and more attention from the public, and on September 3rd, it was transferred to a special Scotland Yard unit. Even though they usually only worked with murders, the detectives assessed the chance of the girl returning home as high. Scotland Yard organized a large-scale search, which was immediately joined by hundreds of volunteers. Seeing her parents' and sister's heartbreaking appeal on the news, caring Londoners scoured the area from early morning until late at night. And the very next day, the detectives announced the discovery of the first substantial clue. They managed to find Alice's backpack, which contained her boots that she was wearing that day. It was found relatively close to her home. This find allowed the police to narrow the search area, focusing on a small section near the canal. The investigators understood that the girl was unlikely to have taken off her boots herself, thrown them together with the backpack, and run away. She had no spare shoes with her, so the situation was becoming increasingly confusing. Scotland Yard decided to publish all available footage from the cameras that captured Alice. The backpack with shoes indicated that the girl could be in serious danger. The main version still remained abduction, but the investigators did not completely rule out the possibility that the girl could have taken her own life. For this reason, they tried to use all available resources to find her. Publishing the footage could attract more attention from the public, and someone might remember seeing Alice that day. Along with this, several hundred more employees from various agencies were involved in the search, and already 600 people were working on this case. Thus, this investigation became the largest in terms of the number of police officers involved since 2005. Some of them were directly involved in surveying the area, while others studied footage from hundreds of cameras that Alice could have been caught on. Scotland Yard also offered a reward of £20,000 for any information that would help find the girl. Despite the fact that the police failed to find her phone, they requested data from the mobile company about its last known location. It turned out that Alice sent a message to her father from almost the exact same place where her backpack was later found. Everything indicated that the investigators needed to concentrate specifically on this area. In this regard, it was decided to thoroughly examine the territory of several square kilometers. Every meter of land and water was manually inspected. Police squads literally felt the bottom of the river and canal for any clues. 2 days after discovering the backpack, it became known that the police had arrested a certain 25-year-old man on suspicion of Alice's murder. The next day, they arrested another person, but refused to comment on the situation until all the details were clarified. However, both suspects were soon released, and Scotland Yard stated that they had failed to establish the involvement of these two people in Alice's disappearance. More than a week passed, and during all this time, there were no developments in the case. Only on September 16th did the police make another statement. They said they were looking for a 41-year-old man named Arnis Zalkalns in connection with Alice's disappearance. He had moved to England from Latvia 7 years ago, lived in this area, and worked as a construction worker. Scotland Yard became interested in him for two reasons that at first glance seemed unrelated. Firstly, Arnis's colleagues at work reported his disappearance to the police back on September 3rd. The man did not show up for work, did not answer calls, and was not at home. It seemed that he had simply vanished. Secondly, the detectives found out that Zalkalns' route from home to work passed roughly along the same path that the girl was walking on the day of her disappearance. All this was not yet enough to draw any conclusions about the man's involvement in the girl's disappearance, but soon the detectives discovered something truly alarming. On one of the camera recordings, they noticed a middle-aged man riding a bicycle across the bridge where Alice had literally passed a few minutes before. This man turned out to be Zalkalns. Sometime later, he was caught on the next camera, and here the detectives noticed a very strange moment. The path between these cameras should have taken only a few minutes, but it took the man on the bicycle almost an entire hour to ride along this road. A reasonable question arose as to what he was doing all this time on such a short stretch. The police officers studied this area and concluded that he could not have ridden to the next camera by a longer route because there simply wasn't one. Even more alarming was the fact that all this was happening in the very area where Alice's path allegedly ended. The police also concluded that the man's clothes were wet when he rode out onto the road. Continuing to study the cameras, the detectives noticed how Zalkalns returned to that very spot on his bicycle 2 hours and 50 minutes later and left again after 50 minutes. At the same time, he was not caught on the camera located on the bridge. This indicated that the man had spent all this time inside a small blind spot. In addition, he was already wearing different clothes. About an hour later, he was caught on the camera of a local store buying beer. The situation repeated itself the following morning. Zalkalns returned to that same spot between the cameras at around 7 o'clock and also returned there once more in the evening. All this was enough to obtain a warrant to search his home. It turned out that the man lived there with his girlfriend and their 2 daughters together. His partner also had no idea where Zalkalns had gone. Upon learning that he was suspected of murdering a girl, she stated that Arnis would never be able to do something like that. She characterized him as a caring and loving father. At the same time, Scotland Yard studied the man's biography and discovered a truly chilling moment. It turned out that Zalkalns had a rich criminal past. In 1998, while in Latvia, he had cold-bloodedly and methodically killed his wife after pre-digging a grave for her in the forest, for which he received only 7 years in prison. After serving his sentence, he moved to England, and the local law enforcement agencies did not even know about his criminal record in his homeland. The police searched Zalkalns' house and found a recently dug-up patch of land on its territory. They did not disclose information about whether they managed to find any evidence there, but a significant find awaited them in the house's basement. A broken back panel from a white iPhone 4S was found there. Alice had exactly the same phone. Upon examining the contents of his computer, the police also found out that the man had searched the internet for information about Alice Gross's disappearance a few days after it happened. Based on all this, Arnis Zalkalns was declared wanted. Scotland Yard feared that the man could have fled back to Latvia or another European country, so he was searched for throughout the European Union. But law enforcement agencies failed to find a single trace of the suspect. Meanwhile, a month had passed since Alice's disappearance, and on September 30th, the police made a disheartening statement. A human body had been found in the river near the place where the girl disappeared. At that moment, the identity had not yet been established, but the police shared one chilling fact. Someone had made considerable efforts and arranged everything so that the body would remain underwater and not float to the surface. Only the next day did law enforcement confirm that the deceased was Alice Gross, although no one doubted it anymore. Everything happened right in the place where she disappeared. The cause of death was strangulation. It turned out that Alice's body was wrapped in construction bags, tied to a large stump. In addition, the criminal had crafted a whole structure out of a bicycle wheel and bricks, which also prevented the body from surfacing. She also had no clothes on, except for one sock. The detectives visited the construction site where Zalkalns worked and found out that the same bags from his construction site were used to conceal Alice's body. After discovering the body, the police continued to search for Zalkalns, working closely with Interpol and local European special services, but they still could not find any traces of him. This continued until October 4th, when investigators made an unexpected discovery. They found the suspended body of a man in a park located just a kilometer from the scene of Alice's murder. 2 days later, experts confirmed that the deceased was Arnis Zalkalns. No one expected such a turn of events. Scotland Yard's main version was that the suspect had fled to Europe, but in reality, he had been right under their noses the whole time. Medical experts concluded that the man had taken his own life on the day of his disappearance, September 3rd, and could not be found for an entire month. However, there is nothing surprising here. Zalkalns chose a very remote and hard-to-reach place where he was extremely difficult to notice. With Zalkalns' DNA on hand, the investigators obtained even more evidence. Near the place where Alice's body was found, the police discovered a cigarette butt, which was sent to the laboratory. Experts extracted DNA from the filter, which matched Zalkalns' sample. In addition, the laboratory stated that the criminal's DNA was most likely found on the victim's body. They could not state this with 100% certainty due to how long the body had been underwater. His DNA was also found on the girl's backpack and shoes. By that time, the police had found out another chilling fact. It turned out that 2 years after moving to England, Zalkalns had harassed a 14-year-old girl just a kilometer from the place where Alice's body was found. The man had tried to commit some indecent acts, but the victim survived, and the man was arrested. This is where it gets interesting. the girl did not press formal charges and the criminal was simply released. It is not entirely clear how this could have happened, but the fact remains. An adult man had molested a girl, ended up in the hands of the police, and avoided punishment. Moreover, information about this case only surfaced after the criminal's body was found in the park. Despite all this, the police continued the investigation, and it took them some time to piece together the picture of what had happened. According to their version, on that fateful day of August 28th, Zal Collins was riding his bicycle along the same route where Alice was walking. Noticing her in a secluded area, hidden from prying eyes, he attacked her with the intent to commit lewd acts. How events unfolded further, we will never know, but the outcome was tragic. Zal Collins killed Alice, after which he hid her body in several stages, constantly returning to that place. We will also never know why he decided to take his own life after what he had done. Can this be called a manifestation of conscience? A very controversial question. Alice's parents, who endured such a terrible tragedy, were outraged by the government's actions. They were perplexed as to how the British authorities allowed a convicted murderer to enter the country and stay here to live. They dedicated many years to fighting for the government to tighten control over immigrants and not allow criminals into the country. Unfortunately, they have not managed to achieve significant changes to this day. A month after Zal Collins' body was found, another interesting event occurred. The medical expert involved in this investigation left a folder with case documents on the train. 30 pages contained important information about the murder, including medical details and undisclosed specifics. The public, media, and Alice's parents harshly criticized the police, but there was nothing they could do anymore. The folder was never found. However, no one was going to put the deceased criminal on trial anyway. The investigators stated that if he were alive, they would have had enough evidence to take the case to court, but there was no guarantee of a conviction. The problem is that all the available evidence against Zal Collins was circumstantial, and he had a chance to avoid punishment, albeit a small one. Instead, a hearing was held in court, as a result of which the jury acknowledged the already obvious fact: Alice was murdered, and her death was not an accident. This procedure was a formality and did not play a significant role. Alice's funeral took place on October 23rd. Thousands of people came to the memorial that day, and at the end of the ceremony, a beautiful song that the girl had written and performed herself was shown on a large screen.
let it go away. You've gotta scream right through the rain. Don't let them take your name, even if the sun begins to fade. You've gotta survive through the life we live today. You've gotta survive through the life we live today.
Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you and enjoy watching. Céline Fagard was born on May 23, 1976, in the French city of Besançon. It was a rather quiet and peaceful place, located not far from the border with Switzerland. Céline had loving parents, as well as 2 brothers and a sister. Their father was a farmer, and the children spent a lot of time outdoors, helping him with various tasks. In school, the girl was actively involved in sports and had many friends. When she was 14, Céline visited neighboring Britain and really liked it there. She began to think about moving there in the future and decided to get an education that would allow her to work in the hotel business. Céline chose this direction because her cousin worked as a hotel manager in Britain, and she liked this profession. After graduating from school, the girl entered a local university to study accounting and continued to regularly visit her cousin in England. Once he helped her get a job at a hotel for the summer holidays, and Céline spent several months there before returning home. At the end of 1995, when she was 19, she decided to go to Britain again for Christmas. At that time of year in France, there were interruptions in the work of public trains, so her parents turned to a truck driver they knew who was going to deliver cargo to England. He agreed to give the girl a ride to a town called Folkestone, from where the girl planned to get to a town called Fordingbridge, where her cousin lived, about 250 kilometers from Folkestone. On December 18th, the girl left home and was supposed to get to her brother's hotel by the evening of the same day. Her parents were waiting for her call, but for some reason, Céline was clearly delayed. She didn't have a mobile phone, so all they could do was wait for the girl to get to the hotel. Closer to night, they received a call, but on the other end of the line was not Céline, but her brother. He said that the girl had not arrived and asked if her plans had changed. Céline's parents began to worry even more and, having no other options, decided to immediately contact the police. French investigators passed the information to their British colleagues, and they began the search for the girl. First of all, they talked to Céline's parents, who immediately arrived in England. They told them that their acquaintance had agreed to give the girl a ride to Britain, and the police found this man. He said that he had taken Céline to Folkestone, after which he had to go in a different direction. At the truck stop, he met another driver from France who was heading to a town called Newbury, an hour's drive from Céline's brother's hotel. The driver agreed to give her a ride, and the investigators found this man. He said that he had dropped the girl off at the truck stop in Newbury, where Céline tried to call her brother from a payphone. She wanted to ask if he could come and pick her up, but for some reason, she couldn't get through to him. At that point, it was already 5:30, and the driver told Céline that she could get to her brother's town by train. But the nearest station was in the neighboring county, and the driver had to deliver goods in a different direction, so he couldn't take her. When the man decided to ask other drivers at the parking lot to take her, the first person he approached refused because he was planning to rest before the trip. Then he went to the second man, and he said that he was going to Salisbury, just half an hour's drive from her brother's town. Moreover, the driver added that the girl could make it in time for the 8 o'clock bus. In the end, Céline went with him, and that's where her trail breaks off. Detectives tried to find the last driver who gave the girl a ride, but they had no precise information to determine his identity. The other driver did not remember the license plates and only said that he was driving a white Mercedes truck. He also provided a description of this person. He was a man aged 30 to 35 with short blonde hair and a beard. In addition, the driver added that this person seemed very suspicious to him. Something in his behavior made him worry, but he still let Celine go with him because she simply had no other choice. The police began to suspect that this person might be involved in the girl's disappearance and made a composite sketch based on the witness's description. As for the first two drivers, they checked them for possible involvement, but both men were in other places, and their alibis were confirmed by a lot of evidence. Soon they found out a fact that increased suspicion towards the third driver. He said that Celine would be able to get from Salisbury to her brother's hotel on the evening bus, but in reality, there were no routes from that city at all. Investigators spread information about Celine's disappearance in newspapers and TV channels, attaching a composite sketch of the suspect. This case immediately spread all over Britain, and there were several reasons for that. Firstly, there were only a few days left before Christmas, and the disappearance of a young girl at this time of year attracted increased attention. Secondly, in about the same area over the past 2 years, several murders of young girls had been committed, and the police believed that they were dealing with a serial killer. Now, they did not rule out that the same criminal could be behind Celine's disappearance, so the local police department threw all its forces into the search. More than 100 police officers were assigned to the case. Helicopters were used to survey the area from the air and even an airplane. They all combed the road along which the driver presumably went with Celine, but they could not find any traces of the missing girl. The first week of searches did not yield any results at all. Police and Celine's relatives regularly appealed to the public to share any information about her whereabouts or that driver, but all the leads led investigators to a dead end. This went on for more than a week, until the morning of December 29th, when the police received a call. A man was driving on the highway near the city of Worcester and stopped to adjust the windshield wipers. Walking past the side of the road, he noticed something strange next to the road, covered with snow, and went closer. To his horror, the man realized that there was a human body in front of him and immediately went home to call the police. Officers arrived at the scene and found the body of a young girl, but they could not quickly identify her. At first, they thought it was the body of a local girl who had disappeared after visiting a nightclub. However, this version was quickly refuted. Only the next day, on December 30th, the police were able to confirm that the girl found was Celine. She was identified by her cousin, as the detectives decided to spare the girl's parents the need to do it themselves. The police immediately noted the fact that the highway near which the body was found was almost in the opposite direction from Celine's destination. This only reinforced the theory that the girl could have been killed by the truck driver who agreed to give her a last ride. Medical experts began to examine the body, and a very grim picture opened up before them. All of Celine's clothes and personal belongings were missing, and the police could not find any of them near the place where the body was found. Experts found several abrasions from heavy blows, as well as signs of strangulation. In addition, the victim was raped, but they could not find any traces of the criminal's biological material. At the same time, experts found that the body had been lying next to that road for only about a day. Considering that 11 days had passed since Celine's disappearance, investigators suggested that the killer could have kept her alive for most of that time. Or he could have been carrying the body with him. Based on the description of the second driver, an industrial refrigerator was attached to the alleged kidnapper's truck, which means he could have kept the body there at a negative temperature for all this time. With all this, the police still had practically no clues as to the identity of the driver. After talking to the victim's parents, they learned one interesting fact. Celine was carrying 2 bottles of champagne with her for Christmas, and like all the girl's other things, they were never found. Most likely, the criminal took them with him, and this opened up an additional opportunity for investigators to identify him. The fact is that champagne of this brand was sold only in France and was not exported to Britain, making these 2 bottles unique throughout the country. The police spread information about this champagne in the media, attaching photos of the bottles. They were counting on the fact that the criminal could have shown them to someone or treated friends or relatives. However, this clue also led nowhere. Despite the fact that no traces of the criminal's DNA were found on the victim's body, investigators decided to take an experimental step. At the beginning of January of the following year, they organized the country's first ever mass DNA collection. The police focused their efforts on Ford Mercedes drivers, as well as similar models. This process took more than a month, and during this time, detectives managed to check more than 5,000 drivers. Most of them voluntarily agreed to provide their samples, but there were those who refused, resulting in these people being placed on a separate list for further verification. Against the backdrop of an active investigation, Celine's case was receiving more and more publicity in the British and French media. Thousands of calls with various tips came to the police, and investigators tried to check each of them. This went on until mid-February, until one of these tips attracted special attention from detectives. They were called by a man who saw the composite sketch of the suspect and said that this person looked very much like his colleague, a 36-year-old truck driver named Stuart Little. He added that the man drove a Mercedes truck with a refrigerator, and the police began to study this person. First of all, they found out that the man had an impressive criminal history, but it consisted of non-violent crimes. Then they decided to go to him and ask him to submit a DNA sample, acting very carefully. The police did not rush things and pretended that Stuart was just one of thousands of drivers they were checking. However, the man refused to submit his sample, which only increased suspicion against him. Despite this, after a few more attempts to convince him to submit DNA, the man finally agreed. Immediately after that, the police received a warrant to search his truck, and there they found the first serious evidence. Traces of blood were found on the mattress of his sleeping place and in several other places in the cab. Analysis showed that it belonged to Celine, and that was enough for an arrest. The police also obtained a warrant to search Stuart's home. In the garage, they found Celine's personal belongings that she had with her at the time of her disappearance. In addition, the police noticed something strange with his device for recording working hours, which by law, all truck drivers had to have. Apparently, on the day of getting rid of the body, Stuart hid information about his movements, but then went to fulfill orders, forgetting to fill in this data. Thus, he had a gap in his working hours, and investigators were sure that during this period, he took Celine's body to that roadside. At his first interrogation, the man stated that he had nothing to do with the murder and had never given Celine a ride. However, after the police brought to the station another driver who identified him among similar men, Stuart changed his story. Now he claimed that he had indeed agreed to give Celine a ride and had engaged in consensual, intimate relations with her. Regarding her things found in his garage, the suspect said that the girl had simply forgotten them when he dropped her off. Of course, investigators were in no hurry to believe this story. They continued to collect evidence against Stuart and found a witness who saw him the day before the body was found. The man was noticed near a warehouse about 80 kilometers from the place where the body was found. He made a fire next to his truck and was burning something. When the police asked what he was doing there, Stuart said that he was trying to warm up the brakes of his truck, which had frozen due to weather conditions, using the fire. The police went to that warehouse and soon found Celine's underwear folded under the fence, which had the girl's blood on it. Having put together all the available information, the investigators formed the most likely chronology of what happened. When Stuart agreed to give the girl a ride, he drove to a deserted place and raped her, then killed her. Then, based on the traces of blood in his truck, he could have been carrying the body on the lower bunk in his cab for 10 days, calmly fulfilling orders. Moreover, a week after the murder, he came home for Christmas, where he celebrated the holiday with his wife and children, while Celine's body was just a few meters away from them. After that, he decided to get rid of the body by cutting it into pieces. This was evidenced by the fact that Stuart had bought a shovel, an axe, and a saw. However, the man for some reason abandoned this idea and dumped the body near the side of the road. Finally, detectives learned that the day after Christmas, Stewart had given 2 bottles of that same champagne to a friend of his. The suspect claimed that he had bought them from a French truck driver, but investigators did not believe his words. It is noteworthy that the police managed to find out one more curious fact. They learned that Stewart had always worn a beard, but had completely shaved it off after killing the girl. When the composite sketch of the suspect began to actively flash in the news, it is also worth noting that the police were able to establish why Celine failed to get through to her cousin when she wanted to ask him to come for her. It turned out that shortly before all these events, telephone codes had changed in Britain, and the girl's notebook had his number with the old code written down. Apparently, she did not know about this innovation and dialed the outdated number. For Stewart's family, friends, and colleagues, what was happening came as a real shock. They all considered Stewart an exemplary family man and a good comrade, and at first many of them even refused to believe in his involvement. Only after information about all the evidence found appeared in the media did they realize what a monster he really was. Stewart's trial began in October of the same year, and he continued to deny everything, but with such a set of evidence, the jury quickly came to a unanimous decision. Stewart was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with the right to early release after a minimum of 20 years. Immediately after that, he tried to challenge the sentence, insisting that the wide publicity of the case had played against him and he had not received a fair trial. However, the Court of Appeal rejected his petition. Stewart tried to get a retrial again in 2006, but he failed this time too. In 2016, the time came to file a petition for early release, but the judge refused to release him. He justified this by the fact that in all those 20 years, Stewart had never confessed to what he had done and continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the murder. In addition, he believed that the man still posed a danger to society. Currently, the criminal is still in prison, and in the foreseeable future, he is unlikely to be released. Finally, I would like to add that Stewart was not involved in other murders that occurred in the same part of Britain. They were committed by another truck driver who was caught at the end of 1997. Although the prosecution was able to prove only 2 murders, they still believe that the man could have been involved in other unsolved crimes. As for Stewart himself, investigators also doubted that Celine was his only victim, but in all this time, they have not been able to find any evidence linking him to other cases. Share your opinion about this story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.